Hi there, this is Reverend Daniel Gregoire, and I am sharing the sermon that was delivered at the Unitarian Universalist Society of Grafton and Upton on Martin Luther King Jr. Day Sunday, which was January 14th, 15th, January 15th, 2017. And the title of the sermon is The Infinite Hope of Martin Luther King Jr. And before beginning the sermon, I just want to share with you that the service actually had four readings, which is somewhat unusual. Typically, a sermon will focus on one reading, and three of those readings were actually delivered in the sanctuary separately by lay members. I asked three lay members to share their stories of finding hope in really desperate times. I asked them specifically, what was it that sparked their heart during a challenging circumstance in their life? And the three shared a variety of experiences. One person talked about how they had a very difficult childbirth where they became visually impaired as a result of a medical complication, and their child was born early. And it was a really, really desperate situation for her and for her family. And the thing that brought her out was the loving and kind actions of her husband, who was optimistic throughout. A third person talked about his experience growing up overseas and early separations that he experienced in his family. Uh, Really difficult separation, and how his family was reunited, and how it was the love of his, in this case, his father, that really sustained him through a difficult time and gave him a sense of hope and possibility. And the last person who shared talked about her cancer diagnosis and how, when she received that diagnosis um, nearly 30 years ago, how it was really devastating for her. And the thing that brought her out of the period of darkness in her life was this really deep sense of connection to the natural world. She described how it was the trees and the flowers and the air, in a sense of harmony in nature, that helped to bring her through. And she lived to tell about this experience 30 years later. So just incredible stories that were powerful. And I asked the members to share their stories because it's very easy for us to think that acts of hope and heroism are things that exist in the distant past and are the province of men who are long and gone. And that's not true. We have people around us that inspire hope through their living. And during these desperate times, for what many people, myself included, um, these times have a lot of uncertainty in them. This recent election and how it turned out, and just everything that we hear day in and day out, for a lot of people, um, is just really, it's causing them to struggle. It's causing me to struggle. So I think now more than ever, it's important for us to connect with what brings us hope, and also to connect with experiences in the past where we've overcome difficulties, so that we remember that we can also overcome difficulties in the future. So this is something that's an ongoing and dynamic process. And these three courageous individuals who shared their reflections on Sunday really embody that. And of course, another person who embodies that is the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, whose memory we celebrated on Sunday. So I actually hope to include their reflections with this video, not in this video, but perhaps as a link below, or to be shared some other way. But I just wanted to give you a context for this particular Sunday service. So without further ado, here was our sermon. Dreams are a source of hope. And you're right in thinking that this weekend there's going to be a lot of talk about dreams as we celebrate our modern day prophet and teacher, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Dr. King was well known for his famous I Have a Dream speech, a speech that was largely improvised. And the thing that is really interesting to me about this improvised speech is that it started off as a request. His favorite singer, Mahalia Jackson, said, Martin, why don't you tell them about your dream? And I can just imagine Martin stopping and wondering, dream? My dream? Oh, the dream! And sharing what is probably the most famous speech in US history and perhaps even global history, the I Have a Dream speech. And lately, we seem to be on course to fulfilling this dream of a more just, more noble, and more compassionate country and world. And me being in this pulpit right now is perhaps just one of the many manifestations of his dream coming true. But lately, it feels as though his dream, our dream, has been deferred, at least for the moment. And I want to wake up for what increasingly is becoming a nightmare. Now, that being said, I'm still someone who believes in the promise of life and the promise of people and the gift of the present moment. Like these are things that haven't left me. I'm still an optimist throughout all of this. But in order to maintain that optimism and to maintain my well being, I have to take a very long view on things, both long in the past and longer still into the future. But like many, I want to wake up from what feels, at best, like a disturbing and confusing dream. I struggle, and I know that we all struggle to varying degrees. Some of us, our struggle comes from the fact that people around us are struggling, even if we don't fully comprehend why they're struggling. As human beings, we pick up on things, and there are certain kinds of emotions that are contagious. Certainly, mourning might be one of them. And I think that we're mourning the loss of things that spark the heart. This is a phrase that comes from Helena Leet, who is a friend of our church. And we are grieving the loss of hope in the future. Now, I want us to consider our sources of hope in difficult times, our source of hope when the future is hard to see. And right now, I know that for many of us, the future is hard to see. It seems when we can see the future, it doesn't seem like a safe place for us, a place where we can live out our values and practice our principled way of life. And we wonder if there's even room for us and room for the people that we love in this future. And I want to declare today that while that future may seem dim, obscure, or even just not there, that the future is there and I see us in the future and it's a space for us and for all people. No one's going to be excluded from this future. And the reason why I'm able to declare that, not just say it, but to declare it is because of my sense of hope, and that hope is inspired by our Unitarian Universalist tradition. And the hope that is in that tradition is limitless. And it allows me to see a future dream rather, that is slowly coming into fruition. It's still coming into fruition. It's still the path that we're on. And this tradition of mine, this tradition of ours, is something that calls us from time to time to wake up and to work diligently and vigilantly towards making the dream a reality. That dream being the establishment of a more just and more noble and more compassionate world for all people to live in. Now, one of the sources of our living tradition is, and I quote, the words and deeds of prophetic women and men, which challenge us to confront powers and structures of evil with justice, compassion, and the transforming power of love. So, one of the places that we can find hope as Unitarian Universalists is in the deeds of prophetic women and men that challenge us. That's extraordinary. And we can find hope in spiritual ancestors and in our spiritual contemporaries. And perhaps it's worth repeating that. We can find hope in our spiritual ancestors and our spiritual contemporaries. And one of those contemporaries, believe it or not, is the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And I say contemporary because Dr. King did not live in ancient times. Had he survived the assassin's bullet, he would be 88 years old today being his birthday. And there are people in this room who are perhaps 88 years old. And there are many more people in this room who perhaps lived at some point during his life. So that is why I say that he is one of our spiritual contemporaries. And the reflections that we heard from people today, they are also our spiritual contemporaries. So I want us to backtrack just a moment and see what his living, the living of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, has to offer us today. Now, Dr. King's story is a well-known one. He is remembered in most places fondly for working to bring about national reconciliation through racial equality. He is known for his I Have a Dream speech, a speech delivered in 1963, where he graciously articulated the ideals of beloved community here in the United States. And this was an elegant vision that he described as a place where Black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Catholics and Protestants, where they would all join hands and sing, "Free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are free at last." And we also know the challenges that he faced, the challenges that he and others like him who are working for racial equality and civil rights. They face violent opposition in the South, subtle racism and paternalism in the North, and the ambivalence of a great many people in places in between. We know of the threats to his life, the acts of violence carried out by segregationists on him personally, on his family, and of course, we know about his tragic death. But here's what we don't know for sure. We don't know all of his interior struggles. We don't know about his doubts. We don't know about his moments of hopelessness. For instance, how did he find hope while he sat in a Birmingham jail? Or when he and others crossed the Edmund Pettus Bridge at Selma? Or where was his hope when 4 little Black girls were killed in the bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church? How did he find hope as he witnessed and saw this mountain of despair and oppression and racism and economic discrimination extending as far back and as far up as anyone could see then and in some cases now? How did he find hope? Dr. King was well aware of the dangers. He knew that his adversaries were many and they were quite terrible. And yet he was committed to the approach of nonviolence in this sea of violence that was perpetrated all around him. In an essay titled A Testament of Hope, Dr. King wrote, and this was an essay that was published after he died. He wrote, "Many people are often surprised to learn that I am an optimist. They know how often I've been jailed, how frequently the days and nights have been filled with frustration and sorrow, how bitter and dangerous are my adversaries. They expect these experiences to harden me into a grim and desperate man. They fail, however, to perceive the sense of affirmation generated by surmounting obstacles. They have no comprehension of the strength that comes from faith in God and man. Throughout the turbulence of the last years of his life, it was this faith in God and man that gave him hope, and it allowed him to continue his work for racial and later economic justice. He described this hope as infinite hope, hope without end. Dr. King was a Christian pastor and steeped in the traditions of the Black Baptist Church. God for him was a personal God who acted to effect change in the world that he created. Dr. King's God was deeply on the side of those who are oppressed and who are seeking their freedom. And that same God was with them through the violence, through the oppression, inspiring them, comforting them, and ultimately leading them to victory. Dr. King's understanding of man was also informed by that tradition and by the history of civilizations. In human history, there is a tendency towards greater compassion and greater acceptance of others over time as societies advance. Now, there's also something more universal in Dr. King's faith in God and man, a faith that inspires hope. And I see that as a understanding and perhaps even a trust of the very big things and the very small things. The very big things, as we might understand them, are the values and virtues that are larger than us and timeless in quality, things that are not created or destroyed or really even fully comprehended, but are absolutely vital to life as we know it. And I would put into that category things such as love, creativity, beauty, peace, hope, justice. All of those things would fit into that category of very big things. And in that second category, on the other side, are the very small things. And I would rightfully put humanity into that category. And our stop and stop tendency towards greater understanding and what we might more broadly call the good. So, as human beings, as men and women, we have this tendency to start doing good and then to stop, and then we start again, and then we stop, and then we continue again. And there's this like a turning back, a reversal. It's not this straight path, it's always this winding road. And that is what we're on, a winding road towards the good. And as small creatures, we have the tendency to forget our way sometimes, but we do come back. We do come back. So, Dr. King's hope found in God and man is also a hope found in the very big things and in the very small things. And that is a kind of hope and a source of hope that I offer to us. In the three reflections that we heard today, we also see that hope found in the very big things and hope found in the very small things. A hope that is found in human connections to the people that we love, a hope that is found from recognizing our place in the grand scheme of things, the grand scheme of the cosmos. I asked Caroline, Cool, and Helena to share their reflections earlier today so that we might not indulge in the false belief that prophetic witness is something that is only found in the past from heroic and distant men who lived long ago. In our living tradition, we have prophets and teachers among us, even today, sharing their insight and experiences and ready to lend their hope when our own hope seems fleeting. Our work now is to lean into the freedom of our tradition with its principles and its sources, and to let those principles and sources be our guide in the days ahead. We have something special here. This is not to say that there isn't enough truth to go around, but there is a deep and powerful truth in our own tradition that I recommend for us, and I recommend that we spread the word about it. And one of those things is the fact that we can find our hope in the prophetic deeds of women and men in countless times and places, including our own time and our own place. So we have to embrace the hope found in those in our midst, those of the past, and perhaps even imagining those who might come ahead of us. We have to remember all of the sources of hope right now, and we have to go to them frequently, and we have to get as much hope as we need. Hope and despair, some people say, are cheap, but I actually think despair is far more costly, and it's never worth the cost. Hope inspires positive action, right now, and whatever action is necessary when the time comes. May we be reminded that we are not alone in our struggles, and that it is not up to us alone to transcend those struggles. May we live as if hope was limitless, free, and available to all people in all times and in all places, even the most desperate times and places, like now. And most of all, don't give up on the dream of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. That is a noble dream worth preserving, a dream of a more just, more noble, and more compassionate world. And perhaps that dream too can be a source of hope for us. Blessed be, and Amen.